Good evening and welcome to episode 6 of Sunday at the Inn. Tonight we have with us for round 2, ding ding, with Alek Yerbury. We were having a conversation in one of the chats on Telegram, and a really cool subject came up about parallel societies and creating subcultures and how to sort of create a wider sphere around what it is that we're trying to achieve and what might sort of be achieved. And I thought it'd be a really interesting episode topic to go down. So as always, I have with me my man Richard Lumby. Say hello, Rich.
Good evening, everybody. Hope you're all well.
Fantastic. Good to have you here as always, my brother. So we'll bring, without further ado, as always, we'll bring in Alek and we'll begin the show.
Good evening, guys. Evening, guys, and thanks for having me on the show again. It's a pleasure to be here.
No, it's a pleasure. Nice to speak to you, Alek, at long last, because obviously
likewise.
Fantastic. Yeah, always great to have you on. You always have a different perspective to sort of take on things, and I genuinely don't know what your opinion or your angle is on this. As always, we try and keep things as fresh as possible. So I really wanted to hear your honest and sort of upfront views on this, because there's a lot of ways of looking at this subject, and it is a very vast one that we could probably sit here and talk about for a good 8 hours rather than an hour, but. It's just something that I wanted to sort of bounce around with you. So I suppose my first initial question to you would be if the world were to change, or if things were to sort of crumble down and be rearranged in a certain way that would encompass what we're sort of saying here about parallel societies and new subcultures coming through that actually become kind of get day-to-day life. What do you see that as entailing, Alex, and how might we get there, do you think?
As in, like, how do I see nationalism advancing, so to speak? Is that what you mean?
Okay, sorry, I probably should have contexted that a little bit better, but the way that I see it is not everyone's nationalism, and this change that is coming, there will be change, because it can't continue as it is. The whole governmental process is, the lies and the money that's being wasted and put in the wrong places. It just can't carry on. Otherwise we're going to end up bankrupt as a country, and we're all in severe trouble. And I don't think it will come to that point. I think there will be big change well before then, and I think the relatively new political awareness and activism that's going on, and the amount of people that are getting angry about these topics, I can see a big change coming. I can see a big change in the law system. I can see a big change in the governmental system, which I'm sure you probably agree with. But yeah, just on that context, really.
Yeah, so I think we're at something of a crossroads as a country, and the issue you've got is primarily, and I said about nationalism, but as you say, it's not necessarily an ideological problem. The sort of crossroads we're at is that for so many years, so many people have been ignored. And you've got a situation now where, as a perfect example of it, the single biggest voting bloc is people who don't vote. And a lot of that will be because people have just lost all faith in that process. I'm calling it now. I might be proven right or wrong, but I'm calling it now that the turnout at the next general election will be lower than 50%. I think the last one was about 55. I think the next one will be lower than 50%, and it will be for precisely that reason. And I think what you're starting to see now is a situation where the trust that people have in the political establishment or the political class as a whole is so low that the default position is to assume that anyone even remotely associated with it is untrustworthy. And I think for the first time in maybe generations, people are now, openly happy to accept something that is an alternative to that system. And I think that's why you're now people organise things on their own. It's why you've now got, all these communities, like there's all these community-led protests against the migrant hotels is a perfect example, where when those happen, the sort of default position of whether it's the councillors, the MPs, or whatever, is to try and take control of that. And it doesn't work. I mean, this one that's coming up in Lincoln on the weekend is a perfect example of that, where Labour is the opposition. So Labour has seized the campaign to be opposed to it and said, well, we're now the opposition to it. But it's failed horrendously because people are simultaneously saying, and even the locals are saying it, but you're trying to make it worse, and you're also trying to run opposition to yourself. And so then, people are saying, I've had enough of all of you.
Yeah, it's
And
very true.
I think it's a very dangerous position as well. I think people, because right now, and I see it all the time, whenever I talk to people at work, or I talk to people, out of work about this stuff, they're like, I totally agree with you, but what can you do? What's the point? And that's the thing. There's such a defeatist sort of attitude about it. It's like, they've been trying this stuff for 20 years and they haven't succeeded. So, why sort of bother now? And I think the big trouble is with that, because they're not getting engaged to the degree that they should be. I mean, a really good example is Poland. Poland, I was watching a BBC interview with their foreign affairs minister a little while ago, and it was one of these jumped up BBC, left wing hardcore, talking to him about his policies with regards to immigration. And she was like, oh, well, all of your European neighbours, they take so many more, refugees and things than you do, and yada yada. And the guy and I couldn't believe his candidness. He was just like, look, don't blame me. He said, I was put in this position, and I was put in this position because I would enact what the people wanted me to do. And they said to me that they do not want any Muslim immigrants coming into our country, full stop. So that is what we've done, and they are the policies that we've put in place. This isn't a matter of racism. This is a matter of what the majority of people have voted for within our country. So we have to enact that, and we have to see that through. And that's a really positive way of running your country, and that's actually listening to your people. But like I said earlier, the really dangerous thing at the moment is that the people are crying out, and everyone is exceptionally irritated. Did you see how I didn't swear there, Richie? You happy with me with that? And people are, they're angry. Like your average man is actually probably more angry than someone like myself who's politically involved. Because you have a chance to sort of see a bit of the counter to all of this madness, whereas they don't.
Yeah.
They just see all the craziness,
I even saw that myself last weekend when I was at Earl's Heaton near Dewsbury. There was a local man organised a protest there to do with a mosque being built in an area of Dewsbury that's got virtually no Muslims living in it. And so again, so irrespective of the cause, the point was, I went there and he asked me to give a speech, which I did. And when you talk to people, you discover that the level of anger that actual people that lived in that area had was so bad that the solutions they were proposing to the issue were ones that I couldn't repeat lest I'd be guilty of an offence. And so it's like when we're simply, if we are simply saying things like, oh well, if someone's a jihadi, just deport them. That's like a 1 out of 10 compared to what these normal local people want to happen. And like you say, and I think it's a phrase I've used before when I've said that at the moment the political establishment is basically carrying itself through power with the ignorance of a Russian Tsar. And what I sort of mean by that is a lot of these people, they live in a bubble where they either don't want to know or simply don't want to care about what normal people think, because they're in an environment where it's very heavy on grift, and where they're used to getting what they want without having to really make any effort whatsoever or engage with anyone outside of their own little bubble. And they're not the only people like that, because there's people who aren't even in political power who behave like that. But it's something which is becoming more and more obvious. because you see it now when there's these campaigns against issues, whether it's the drag queen story hour, whether it's the migrant hotels, all these issues where as soon as someone says something like, "Oh well, I'd like to help you, but unfortunately, because of UN treaty," and the sort of response from the room is, "Oh," because it's like people know, and people are sick of being treated with ignorance.
Yeah, it's a sad state of affairs. We were at a protest in the centre of Birmingham, and it was a truth of protest, freedom. British Lions for Freedom, I think, organised it. Now, what was interesting there is that they're trying to promote the idea that at the next general election, that we get 650 independent candidates, basically to stand against the sitting MPs, because I think there's a real feeling that it doesn't matter what rosette they're wearing. I mean, red or blue, they're two cheeks of the same arse, basically. And it's, I think everyone is starting to see that now. They see the futility of picking the old teams. It doesn't fit anymore because they both seem to be working for the same paymasters, and they certainly aren't working for the people that they're supposed to be working for.
Well, what
Certainly.
I've compared them to, I might have even done it in the last show we did, is it's like gangs in a drug cartel where they sort of compete with each other in order to get the most that they possibly can. But when it's them versus anybody outside of that cartel, they will immediately join forces where possible in order to deal with that outside threat. That is how they behave. They behave like a gang cartel.
Of course they do. It's like solicitors, isn't it? If you've ever had the pleasure of going through the justice system in the UK, you have the same with um, barristers and sorry prosecutors and defence. They'll have this raging arguments and stuff in court, and it seems all very very good. But I mean, it's all theatrics. As soon as that's done, they go down to the coffee shop together and have lunch together and talk about the case. They're all pals. They're all part of the same thing. They're just, they're doing a job to have a certain outcome, aren't they? The big trouble is with this is it's gone so far now, and it is so deep that it,
It's,
it
I
just
think
it needs
it's obvious
completely
now.
remaking now, doesn't it? It
It's
has.
obvious now, Joe. It's obvious now. That's the
Yeah,
difference. I mean, the situation wasn't any different in when I was standing in elections for the BNP back in the sort of the late noughties. All the parties worked together. They didn't work with us, but they worked together. You could see that they were like a cartel then.
yeah.
It just wasn't as obvious and it wasn't as blatant. It's become more blatant as time has gone on because they've become so. I mean, they've become so similar. I mean, yeah, they'll have differences in how they arrange the deck chairs on the deck, but there really isn't any fundamental differences between them.
I,
They'll all
I think
work for the globalist machine.
I think they've got. I think part of it
Yeah.
as well is that they've rested on their laurels for too long, and so the level of effort that they used to put in order to conceal their true behavior from people has been diminishing because they've gotten used to being able to lie to people without ever being caught, and sort of now what you're having is people are catching them out, and they don't really know how to deal with it. It's a bit like it's a bit like with these protests I've been going to recently, where increasingly the unions of, even though the unions were always bankrolling stand up to racism, Antifa, etc., I've noticed at the ones I've been going to, the unions are having to personally come and organize it more themselves. And I think that's because they've spent 10, 20, 30 years but relying on their little minions to come and do it for them. But now they're starting to face enemies who are actually competent, and there's so much going on all across the country run by different people, but because they're now facing opposition that's actually competent, like yourselves, whether it's coming from even PA, but it's like, because that's competent, they now don't really know what to do because they're suddenly dealing with people who can't necessarily be taken for a ride as easily as in the past. And so then what you find is it's like the equivalent of the enemy general having to go to the front lines to personally sight positions, because in the past he could rely on his cronies to do it for him. And if he was fighting, terrible, an enemy that was useless, it wouldn't matter if he was poor. But now, because they're actually starting to deal with people who are competent, the panic set in because their only real option is to try and do it themselves, and they've realised that all these little cronies and minions were very good at just being mindless stooges, but are not very good at actually dealing with competent enemies.
Yeah, and the thing. Oh,
I
sorry.
think another part of it, Alex, is the fact that the issues now are different than they were. I mean, like obviously this ends now campaign, the sexualisation of children. That wasn't really the case back in the day.
No,
They
that is
weren't
true.
pushing. They weren't pushing the sort of paedophilia, the legalisation of this, that, and the other. You hadn't got the sheer numbers of people coming on boats now, them being housed in hotels. That wasn't happening in the noughties. So yeah, it was a lot easier for them to whip up opposition because they could just use words like it's racism, it's this, that, and the other. It's much more difficult now because ordinary people are looking and going, hang on, this isn't right. The sort of people they may have relied on for a little bit of tacit support, they're not getting that, and you can see that in the numbers that they're getting. It's much more difficult for them to muster the numbers because they can't just say it's about racism because people are going, hang on a minute, this is about putting up people in hotels. Well, we've got homeless people, our own people, all over the streets, veterans. This is about the sexualisation of our children.
I mean,
This
I
isn't.
mean, I think people are sort of at the
Yeah.
point, in particular, when with sort of the argument of it's wrong because it's racism, and it's racism, therefore it's wrong. It's at the point where that argument is losing its effectiveness, and people are actually starting to say, "No, I don't want to hear. I don't want you to tell me if it's racist. I want you to tell me what is rationally wrong with it." And because because all they can really do is use the dogma as evidence for itself, people have had enough of it. You can't. There's only so long that you can say to people, "I'm right because my ideology says I'm right, and my ideology says I'm right because it's my ideology." There's only so long you can use that circular logic with people before they've had enough of it.
Yeah, I mean, you can only promote black people. I mean, you hear it all the time. As soon as you put the, unfortunately, I have to listen to radio at work. But yeah, every other 5 minutes is promoting promoting the vibes of young black artists and stuff. And it's like they're the ones who constantly tar it with the actual race construct around it. Do you know what I mean? And
It's
what
been a
what cracks me up
saturation,
is
hasn't it?
just yeah,
Been a
like there only comes a
saturation with
time
it.
before you just realize that, well, what you're actually doing is you're actually racinating people. You are making
Yeah,
us
very much.
be aware of who we are and our race because you're separating us apart. Do you know what I mean? And by you constantly promoting them and never like, can you imagine there ever being an advert skit on the radio saying promoting pure European, music, young European music, man, it'd be burnt to the ground in moments. The promoters would shut it down and whatever. And it's this kind of thing that we understand as nationalists, and we just sort of laugh at it now and just like it's just commonality now, isn't it, amongst to see these things, but it's not to other people, and they get really quite wound up about it. They don't like it, and it's
We
look,
we noticed it earlier. We noticed it a lot earlier, nationalists.
Hmm.
But what's happening now is it's become so blatant and obvious that even the ordinary Joe on the street, sorry Joe, even the ordinary man on the street he's just looking and going, this is every person I see on the television is black. I hear it all the time in local
yeah.
pubs and amongst locals. They're all talking about that. They all see this absolute saturation coming at them constantly, and it's overloading. It's overloading even the temperament and the tolerance of people who before had just sort of shrugged and gone, oh well.
Well, I mean, case in point was the fact that where they had that really bad riot against the hotel full of migrants in Knowsley near Liverpool,
Mm,
and somebody pointed out that seat, that area, is one of the most hard. I think it might even be the most hardcore Labour voting area in Britain. So it was sort of the last area where you would expect that to happen. And Merseyside has always been considered quite like a liberal left wing area. And yet that was where the sort of retaliation was worst. And that was like an interesting observation. And it sort of ties into what you were saying, where even people who might see themselves as reasonably tolerant and left wing are sort of pushed to that extreme.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
I guess it comes to this, just to bring it back around to the sort of the topic of the actual stream. I mean, it really does. I sort of said it earlier on. I know, but it's all relevant, isn't it? This is the thing. This is what I mean about this being such a vast subject. You know, you could talk on so many aspects of such a long time. But I mean, you're really faced with three choices, aren't you? In our situation where we are being overcome, essentially, if we just carry on like we are at the moment, England will not exist as it did, before. Neither will Wales or Scotland or Ireland. Now we have three choices: we either run, we hide, or we fight. There's not really, any other option. And
Are running and hiding two different options?
yeah,
Are
because
they?
I'd say hiding in our country and
Well,
like in the woods, or going off
but
grid in our country would be hiding. I think
I mean,
running would
both
be actually
options
just leaving
result.
the country completely.
I mean, I'd say both
So,
options result in a loss, and this is something I've talked about, and I'm kind of more vocal about it now. Is that ultimately, if you let's say you go off the grid and you say, right, I want to live in an enclave like Arania, and I want to have my own little stronghold. The existence of that is totally dependent on the benevolence of a government which you hate, which you believe hates you and wants rid of you. And there's a very real problem, and this is a problem I started identifying about a year ago and talking to people about it, was the fact that however powerless you might think you are, and a lot of people have been rendered with this illusion of powerlessness, but however powerless a person might think they are in society, if you remove yourself from society so that society no longer requires you for anything, you will be at your most powerless. Because there's a reason why homeless people get abused by the government. There's a reason why pensioners get taken advantage of by the government, and it's because the government looks at them and says those people don't give anything, therefore they're ripe for abuse because we don't need them. And I'm not saying that as a judgment, but what I'm saying is that's why those groups get abused. The government will happily trample on homeless people because it will say, well, they don't work, they don't pay tax, they don't do this, that, whatever, so therefore we can abuse them without consequence. And the same fate will happen to people if they say, well, my solution to the state not being how I want it to be is to totally remove myself from it and have no stake in it and be of no value to it. Whereas actually, what you're going to do is you're going to make yourself the easiest possible target, because then you're going to have no friends, you're going to have no allies, and the government is going to say, well, I now no longer need that person because I always hated them, but now they don't work, now they don't pay tax, now they're not part of society. They can now be safely aggressed or else disposed of, and it's not going to hurt me because I'm not getting anything out of them anyway. And so that's why I'm never going to sort of advocate this approach of self segregation from society. I think
I
it
would
has the
agree.
opposite effect to what people intend.
So, Alec, tell me, how do you see a parallel society then? What's your version of a parallel society, in your opinion?
So but based on what people have sort of said, what they think a parallel society is, I mean, I would say a true parallel society would be one which doesn't really have any interaction with a regular society. It'd basically be insurrection. Like that's what a parallel society would be. But the thing is, I think most of these sort of groups or sort of schools of thought that promote parallel institutions or off the grid institutions. I don't think they really are like that because, for example, let's say I lived off the grid in the woods in sort of in parallel to society. Now, if my house catches fire, I'm still going to ring the fire brigade. If someone tries to rob me, I'm still going to ring the police. If I'm having a heart attack, I'm still going to ring an ambulance. So I'm still using society's resources. I'm just not having any involvement in it except on my own terms. So I don't really that's what I think when people talk about building parallel societies, I think that is what they envision as a parallel society. But what I actually think that is it's basically society, but only when it suits me. And that's something which me personally I'm never going to really encourage because I look at it and I'm like, well, to say I want to be in the group when it suits me, but an individual when it suits me, that to me is what the left do.
See,
That to
I
me
don't
is
think
what.
I just don't see that it has to be so cut and dry as that, so black and white. You know, I think I think aspects of a parallel society could flourish quite well within a society. You know, it could just be as simple as taking the power away from the powers that be with regards to food. You know, coming up with a really usable way for a community to grow enough food for that community within the community to, you know, raise chickens for meat and have a hub in the center of these communities that has a slaughterhouse and an arboretum to, you know, to manage the sort of slaughtering and distribution of the meat and stuff, you know, just to pull away from that. But it's something that's actually done by the people for this society. So you're almost like in a club that you're working together and you're like, look, we don't like what you're doing. We don't like the pesticides that you're putting on our food and that sort of stuff. So we're just going to do our thing over here that you're not involved with. Very similar to what they did in the Isle of Wight with their currency and things like that. You know, there are ways of breaking away from society and doing your own thing, but then also, you know, actually still kind of being a part of it and still contributing to that society. You know,
I,
you could go as far as medical, you know, dentists, you know, all of these sorts of things. They're just services that the government are meant to provide for us. But I mean, you know, and you know, you say back to that. I mean, my idea of a working society would be that you ring up your doctor and you actually get an appointment, you know, relatively
Well, yeah,
soon. You know, that if I called the police because my car had been broken into, that would actually be investigated properly and that they might actually make a charge out of it rather than the pathetic 1% of the 90 of the 100% of car crime that's solved within the UK. You know, these simple services are just meant to work. There's enough money there for it to happen. You know, we're one of the most heavily taxed societies in the world, and yet we rank, I think it's 18 at the moment in standards of living. It's just atrocious.
yeah, but they
You
don't
know,
want it to happen, Joe. It's not. All of this that's happening to us isn't incompetence. It's deliberate.
yeah, I
And I
agree.
mean, it's totalitarianism coming from the global elites in particular. Now, what I think of a parallel society, I've not read the whole book, but I've seen excerpts on Academy of Ideas, which is something I quite like watching on YouTube. But on things like, was it Viktor Havel, the Czech guy that was against the Czech communists, and he talked about parallel societies. I did a number of people during that Cold War period in the Soviet-run countries. They started to build parallel societies. In things like they were talking very much in the music scene and things like that, so that people stopped using the state stuff, started to
yeah,
gravitate more towards these parallel societies. And of course, once they started gravitating there for their bread and circuses and stuff like that, they then started to become more in tune with what the more dissident mindset was, because you know people wanted to go there because they got fed up of the state sponsored stuff and the ideas that were coming in. Now, a parallel society, there are lots of different ideas to it, how you would go about it. I mean, obviously, there's music and culture. That's one area where you could, you know, where we could start, where people could start moving towards, and sort of building up our
education.
own cultural thing. Education is a massive one.
Yeah,
Homeschooling your children to me is
yeah.
like we could bring down. If you think about it, if everyone just pulled their kids out of the school tomorrow, that's the end of state
Curriculum would be
education.
changed
Like that, it's
dramatically.
gone.
Yeah,
It's gone. It's literally, that's how easy
Yeah.
it would be. Now, it's not going to happen tomorrow overnight, but if there's a slow movement away from that, and it's got to, I don't want to be going on forever because I want to give Alec a chance to speak. But if it's going to be anything, I think it's going to have to be local. It's almost like nationalism with a small n, localism, because all of these things can only be organised at that local level. You can't quite do it nationally because it's too far removed. So if you're going to have like a homeschooling clubs, you have to start them in your area. You have to start pulling kids out and working together. Because most people will say we can't do this because of time. I haven't got the time. So you've got to start working together. We've got to show people the benefits and start offering them, I think, practical solutions through these parallel societies. But I'm not going
Good.
to waffle on too much.
Can I just drop one more in? I'm just really sorry, but another really good idea of this, of creating these kinds of things, um, is child daycare. Pull away from paying £55 a day to have your child raised by a blinking stranger. Why can't we be community focused in the sense that, like, look, this girl is on, maternity leave for the next 6 months. She's going to be on maternity in the next few months or whatever. Why can't there just be a banding, a grouping of women, to share experience about raising children, to talk about things, do women's stuff, and all of that? And it would save so much money, and it would build a massive community amongst women. It
And
would cost nothing, and
yeah, and
it's
grandparents, mate. We've said this
yeah,
before, haven't we? Me and you talking privately.
yeah,
There are a myriad of grandparents out there who could homeschool the children.
yeah,
If you think about it, don't mean homeschool their own grandchildren, but I mean there are grandparents out there.
yeah,
They would love to feel useful again. They
Yeah,
would
well, I
love to
think
feel a useful part.
yeah,
I think the biggest obstacle. I totally agree with you. Like the homeschooling thing, it would be great if it could work. I think the biggest obstacle to the homeschooling idea at the moment, the biggest obstacle is the fact that uh, the way the world is and sort of the way incomes are, it becomes very hard for people who are employed to do it. And I think the issue that a lot of people would homeschool their kids. I think probably by choice if they could. But I think the issue you've got now is for a lot of people, the choice would be between working and having an income or homeschooling their kids. And for example, if someone's a single parent, the issue they're going to have is, well, if they homeschool their kids, they're then having to live on the dole, which means they're not going to have much money because they can't work and homeschool. And I think like the homeschooling thing, I think it's be fantastic if it could work, but I think that is like there will population. It's probably never going to be an
Your audio's cut out,
option.
Alec. Oh, try speaking again, mate.
Can you hear me?
Ah, we've got you
Can
back
I?
now. Ah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was going to
fantastic.
say
Stay there, mate.
yeah, it's just unfortunate that for the majority of the population, I don't think homeschooling at this point in time is going to be an option
I agree.
because
I agree with you. I agree
of the
with
need for
you.
employment.
Yeah, I agree with you. But what I was trying to say, I think, with the grandparent thing, is there's a lot of people out there who, shall we say, are no longer in employment due to their age, but would quite like to actually still be useful members of society. Now, if you could get a sort of local groups where there's a few of these the elders of the society of our communities,
Retired teachers.
possibly even some retired teachers, you could get them to run the sort of homeschooling. That would allow the parents, the productive people, to carry on working.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah, you're right.
encouraging that to happen, we're not talking about
Yeah,
it'll happen overnight and encouraging people, but those older people have so much to give. I'm saying this as an old person myself, I suppose, but they've got so much to give and so much to offer, though, and I actually think what we're talking about here is actually would be a natural order anyway, you
yeah,
know,
Well, I think that's what
allowing the
used to happen.
productive people to go out. Yeah, and I think that's what I mean by getting back to things like that. But also, it can only happen on local levels. You can't like try and arrange this sort of nationally. You've got to do it piece by
absolutely.
piece, area by area, and offer that option for people where you can, and getting people to come forward. Because I know that most people once they retire, they're bored. They want to be doing something.
Yeah.
They don't want to just be sat in front of the telly. They would probably like to be useful members of society, but society has probably said, "Oh yeah, time's up now. Go and put your pipe and slippers, and forget about it." But it's those sort of things like that. I think any parallel society we come up with, I think, has got to start looking at very, very practical solutions at a local level that will suit all the needs. And as you said, we allow the productive people to still be productive.
Well, if you create something that is more effective than what is currently in place on a small level, it could only just catch. If it's free for a start off, if it costs very little, the people's children are being taught in a way that they find is appropriate, which is a big one. I just think if you started these things from within, rather than just because this is something that's always really bothered me about the whole nationalist narrative. It seems to be this very childish, destructive, like, oh, just rip it all down because it's just ruined. And I'm like, okay, then, well, what are we going to replace it with first? Because I'm not too chuffed about you all ripping down everything and not
Well,
having an idea of what we're planning on doing afterwards.
to be honest, on a very similar note to that, this is something I've talked about before, and it's to do with there's sort of two angles you can take with regards to right. As a nationalist, I feel that society should be more nationalist. The two angles you like, let's say it's very simple, but let's say there's two angles you can take. You can either say what I'm going to do is create an alternative nationalist society and bring people into it, or I can take society as it is now and make it more as I want it to be. So effectively, you can either build your own community or you can take the community that already exists and try and modify it. Now, what I think that parallel society view is, this is what I think it is to say, I'm going to create a new society and bring people into it. Now, I personally believe that that doesn't work, and that actually what you've got to do is take the society that there is, take the communities that already exist, and then make inroads into them. I mean, that's what I'm sort of been trying to do since the beginning of this year, and it's harder to do. I think it genuinely is harder to do, especially if you're sort of an outsider. It's hard to do, but I think that it's one of those risk payoff things where even though it's harder to do, if you can make inroads into a community that already exists, your ability to then be cast out of it is extremely low and extremely limited because you're then part of it. And your ability to be rendered powerless over that community is very low because you then become an integral part of it. And I think that's now as you were talking, it kind of clicked in my mind how to explain it. Is that's kind of what I mean when I say that by creating your own separate community, you can inadvertently put yourself in even more of a position of powerlessness because you're then able to just be ignored and not dealt with. Whereas if you're sort of a pivotal part of that pre-existing community, it's much harder for you to just be ignored and shut down and silenced because that community needs you as much as you need them. And so that's kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've got to do is look at how this situation came upon us, and in terms of our communities became dependent on the state because the state offered them convenience, like we will educate your children, we will do this for you, we'll do that, and people became more and more through convenience. People just said, okay, I'll let you do that, I'll let the state do this, I'll let the state do that. When we as because we are small in number, when we go into these communities, what we have to be doing is offering a practical solution in a sense that I'm not saying makes the people dependent on us, but makes us an integral part of that community. I'll give you one example. We've used the homeschooling one. I'm not going to go over that one again. But take, for instance, the idea of a purchasing group. Now, at the moment, food prices are a problem all over the place. Everybody's struggling with the
Yeah.
cost of living crisis. So, if you can get a purchasing group, by that, what I mean is just a group of people, local people, who are pooling their resources, their buying power, and going directly to local farmers, local growers, whatever, of producers of food, and getting the best price they can. Now, what you'd essentially be doing is cutting out that parasitic corporate middleman of the supermarket, because the supermarket is squeezing the farmers and the producers for the price. We're getting squeezed at the other end for the price that we're paying. Now, if you could get enough people in a large enough group to make it worthwhile, a good buying power, go directly to the food producers are going to get a better price than they're getting off the parasitic corporate middlemen, and we're getting a better price. We'll be paying a better price than we're paying the parasitic middleman. And the
better
two,
quality food.
you squeeze these people out of the picture,
Well, I
but you
think,
also create
yeah.
that sort of bridge that makes you useful to a
Well,
community in a sense by organising that for them.
it's interesting you talk about cutting out the middleman, and the reason that sort of piqued my interest is because what you're saying is absolutely right. Especially with relation to the farmers, and the reason I think what you talk about is relevant to a lot of stuff I've been talking about recently is because cutting out the middleman is effectively what I think nationalism does. And I think that the reason why there is so much hostility to nationalists from, the likes of the main parties, the likes of the trade unions, etc., is nothing to do with the ideology itself or its, racism, whatever it might be. It's because what it actually does is it cuts out the middleman, and they are the middlemen who rely upon being the sort of institutionalized arbiters in order to sort of grift their way through life. And I think that is why nationalism gets so much hostility from these kinds of entities, is because, as you say, if you cut out them, it's a threat to the middleman. Like, let's say you were to be trying to create an organization based on your example, where a group of people are buying directly from the producers. The most hostility to that you're going to face is from people like supermarkets or the corporations that run the supermarket, because their existence is what's being challenged. Now, they won't care what your reason for trying to do it is. They won't care about your ideology. The only thing they care about is that their existence, financially, is being challenged. And I think that's sort of a really interesting point when you're talking about that, and how, it's sort of by cutting out the middleman, the effect that that has.
Yeah, I mean, it will open us up to. We're at a point where local communities are struggling. They're struggling with the cost of living. So there's never been a better time to talk about this to people. If you'd have said it a few years ago, people are going, oh, I'll go to the supermarket and get everything under one roof. But now people are actually struggling, and the idea was broached to me 15 years ago in the BNP, and at that time you couldn't get much traction with it because to me people could buy things cheaply at the time. Everything was cheap. They weren't really that interested. But now they're struggling. People are struggling. And I mean, there's a group of us here, of our people, nationalists and family members and that have already started to talk about buying meat direct from the farms as a group. And that idea gelled in my head. And I thought, well, why is it just us? Why just us 5 or 6 people? We could get 30, 40 neighbours. If you're offering them cheaper meat and you're offering them cheaper groceries, then all of a sudden your politics aren't going to matter. They're going to be thinking, hang on, I can get cheaper groceries.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. That's where I think not only would we be doing a service to your community that would enhance your usefulness to that community, but as you said earlier, Alec, now you hit on a very good point. Once you've enhanced your usefulness, it's much more difficult for them to dislodge you because people are
Yeah.
actually looking at you as something useful to
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. If you had all of these things in place, it's like, well, they're trying to help out with the childcare, they're helping out with home education, they're helping out with like cost of food, and and all this kind of stuff. So, yeah, this racist thing just isn't washing anymore. Do you know this is and this is where you see these things sort of blow up, don't you? Which is what it needs. The trouble is with a lot of these things, it needs a bit of guidance. It needs something that's really well thought out, a really sensible plan. Like sort of, I guess, like we kind of outlined really the past half an hour.
No, no,
Just
I wouldn't say mine's a sensible plan. Yeah, it's an idea that's just floating around, which I thought
I think
tonight
it's
was a good platform for us to throw ideas, if you
Yeah.
like,
definitely.
into and sort of like play around with them a little bit. And obviously,
Yeah.
other people who are watching this, they'll listen and they'll think, "Hang on, yeah, that'd be good, but you could do this." And it's really just a case of us looking at it and saying, well, if we're going to do this parallel society, because I actually agree with you 100% on that, Alec, what you said, there are two types, and the run away to the hills and try. One, we're too small. As a group of people, we're too small. I mean, when people start talking about land projects and that, the truth is, had a better one in the sense that it was families. I mean, in nationalism, it's a lot of single blokes, and a lot of single blokes in a
Yeah.
field isn't going to get anywhere, is it?
Land projects, and I've spoken to a few people I know about this. The issue I think you're going to get with land projects is, let's say a group of nationalists, say 100 of you, say let's as an organization buy a piece of land that belongs to us. Right, I think the sort of issue people don't think about is, right, 100 people put money into that land. Well, that land is now the property of those 100 people. So what happens if one person has a falling out with the rest and says, well, I don't want to be in this group anymore? You can't then prevent them using that land because they own it just as much as anybody else. Now, the only thing you could say is, well, you put money in, but the land belongs to the organization, not to you. But who in the world would sink thousands of pounds into buying a piece of land so that person B can then dictate to them when they can and can't use it and what they can and can't use it for? Nobody would, which is why I think that whole land purchase thing, I honestly do think for people that say aren't family members, I think that's untenable for precisely that reason.
That's why we pulled out of the truther one. We were looking at the truther one. It was sounded like a good idea because the stake was a couple of grand. And for a couple of grand, you'd get so many square, blah, blah, blah. But when we went along, there was a big meeting at Millennium Point in Birmingham. And I remember looking around the room thinking, I just don't know these people. And
Yeah, no one's
knowing
going to want to live with each other.
and
Also,
knowing how easily nationalists fall out, and I can see these, and I'm thinking, oh God, I can see
and
this
you'd
being.
also get people who'd sabotage it, because what they would do is they would buy into it, and then after like a month, they'd say, well, I want to cash it out. I don't want it anymore, so I want my money. And the option's going to be that legally, the option's going to be that either the whole piece of land gets sold so that they can have their cut of the money, or everybody else has to have a whip round in order to buy out their piece of
Buy them
land.
out.
And it would be
Yeah.
so easy for someone who's a saboteur to do that.
Well, they get
Yeah.
funded as well. They'd
Yeah, it'd be
easily get
so easy.
funded to do that.
And
So
so you'd either permanently be buying or selling pieces of land and having to keep moving around because people say, oh, I want to cash it out. Or you'd have to permanently be forking out more and more money to buy out every single person who wants to leave according to how much they put in.
yeah, the other issue, there was another issue as well that I could see, was there were some people who were saying they were going to move onto the land permanently, some who it was just going to be a part-time thing, and I could see that going disastrously wrong. You get the people who are doing all the work, looking at these people turn up at weekends using it like a holiday home, thinking,
Yeah,
hang on a minute.
you'll lose your rag with them,
Exactly that,
basically.
mate. Exactly that. And coming from a man who spends a lot of time on his land working it, it's not easy.
No.
It's not easy. It's like hundreds of hours of serious graft. Like, it's no messing around. But I mean, there is a big distinction as well. I think we need to draw to as well that there is a big difference between being seriously self-efficient and sort of taking agency over your own being and running away. I think, and the thing is, I think if you can set up a good format to look after yourself, then you can use that format then to look after your community, and then so on and so forth. Well, family first, then community. But you sort of hear where I'm coming from, you know. And I think there's a big difference between that, you know. I personally don't like this idea of running off into the woods and, you know, just shutting off from all society. You know, I think it's just a bit daft, really. And I think that was maybe my idea of this stream, was to put that across, that that isn't the direction that we should be going in. And I hear it so often now of just, you know, it's defeated.
I think more people are moving away from that way of thing. I think at the point where the jabs were likely to be mandatory, a lot of people were thinking we're going to have to run here, we're going to have to take it to the hills. And I think as time's gone on, I think more people have come to the realization that one, it's not realistic, but two, it's a case of there was 20% of us that didn't get jabs, so that's a lot for them to come after. And you know, really, we should stand our ground, and we should sort of make something of that. And then that's from the point of view of the jab. But I mean, sorry, I know I've probably buggered YouTube up now by saying the jab, but from the point of view of nationalism, we're even smaller as a group of people at the moment. If we then remove ourselves from the community and go and live in a field, we not only are we going to be easy to pick off, but we're never going to never going to get that message out. You've got to still be part of your community, like you
Well, yeah,
said earlier,
I
Alex.
agree
I
with
agree
you.
with that.
It's
You have to be part of it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, you're in danger of, in your sort of, in your quest to be more powerful, you're actually going to make yourself even more powerless. And you know, I know there are some people who sort of advocate going off into the wilderness on the grounds that society is imminently to collapse, and the sort of belief is, well, I'll have my own little fortress, so I'll survive, and no one else will. And I think actually the reality will be that because you're on your own with no allies, you're probably going to be the first person that gets targeted, because you're not the harder target, you're actually the easier target, because you know nobody has any relationship with you, therefore nobody's ever going to help you.
True. Needless to say, we decided on a land project family thing, which would just be about producing food, not running away. So,
Yeah,
but
no,
yeah, we
I
decided
think
to go
that's a
down the
really
route.
good idea, because a lot of people, you know, are big into producing their own food anyway, and I know quite a few people who do it, and it is really good, and it's good to sort of be able to be self-dependent, because in a way, dependence is effectively slavery, even if you don't see it like that, you know, and you know the
Absolutely.
hand that gives is above the hand that takes, and so you know if you can do that for yourself, you're in an infinitely better position.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's why we looked at it. Yeah. So,
Absolutely.
so I mean, the difficulty of that we're talking about in terms of creating these parallel societies, of course, getting people to get into their communities and start and coming up with ideas. Nationalists in general, particularly a lot of them at the moment, unfortunately, seem to be very shy of mixing with the normies, as they might call it, whatever, which I think is a big mistake. I think we should never divorce ourselves from anything. I think we should always try and stay as much as we can in touch with normal society, which is why, I mean, despite a lot of criticism, which is why we put our stream out on YouTube, because yeah, you can go on Odyssey, but you're in an echo chamber. It's as simple as that. And you're preaching to the converted. You've got no chance of getting that bit further out and talking to different people, which is again why we try to have as many guests that are not just nationalists, that have got lots of different point of view. And again, that's just our way of building those bridges outward from nationalism and saying, like, you know, it's not what you think it is. It's not you know the ideologues make it what it is. I'm not an ideologue, I'll be honest, Alec. I'm not. I'm a nationalist because I'm a family man. You know, I want my children and my grandchildren to survive, and for that to happen, my people have to survive, because the two things are, it's a
Yeah.
symbiotic relationship. Simple as that.
No, I try not to be sort of too much of an ideologue. It's something I've touched on a few times, where it's sort of the fact that I know there's people in nationalism who view the world in a very ideological way, but I think it's important to understand that most people in the world don't view the world through the prism of ideology. They don't want to, and they just aren't. They either aren't capable of doing it, or they just don't want to do it. And I think trying to sort of turn it into an ideological war as opposed to an existential one is a mistake that I think a lot of nationalist groups make. Where they turn it into this big ideological struggle, but it's not. I see it as an existential one. Now, I can understand it through the prism of ideology, but I also understand the fact that most people don't see it that way. And so trying to sort of tell people the ins and outs and the minutiae of an ideological point of view is pointless, because most people will be listening to it and thinking, well, so what? What difference does that actually make to me?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I totally agree with you. They're worried about day to day stuff. They're worried about how they're going to pay the bills, worried about the mortgage, they're worried about their kids being taught this, that, and the other. You literally have to get down to those levels and don't worry about the idea. Nobody cares about. I mean, you can quote Nietzsche all you like and run around this council estate where I live, quoting Nietzsche and quoting this, that, and the other. And I'll tell you what, you'll just get completely blank looks. But you start talking about the cost of living, you start talking about what's happening in schools for the sex education, and people will engage with you. So it's about the practical problems that people are facing. That's where we have to engage the people. We can't engage, and you have to find out what level they're at as well. When you're talking to people, it's not necessarily about trying to find a nationalist. What you're trying to do is find somebody who's starting to question what's going on, to have questions. The truth will lead them there in the end. It'll lead them down the path, because the truth only goes one way. We all know that. But some people are just on a different part of the journey, and you have to coax them along slowly but surely. More red crumbs than red pills. Just get those people along the track, but be practical about it. This is my view on it. It's been my view for a long time. To work in the communities, you have to sort of like park the ideology a little bit and just get down and start talking to people. Find the common ground that you've got with that individual there and that individual there, and work on that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how do you see it going forward then, Alec? Because I've done a lot of talking tonight, which is unusual because it's normally Joe.
I think he talked before. I didn't hear what he was saying. Do you sort of mean going forward in the short term, in the
Yeah,
long term?
in the short term, where do you see this going? How do you? I mean, you obviously I've done a lot of talking about some of the ideas I've got. Have you got any ideas about how we as how we can implement it practically? What we can do
So
tomorrow, the next day.
I think at the moment the biggest problem we've got is trying to actually mobilize numbers of people, and that all these sort of solutions they require a sort of initial level of investment to be able to implement. And so I think at the moment the sort of biggest problem that has to be overcome is a lot of the disunity that exists within nationalism. And I think, but once that is done, once we can sort of safely say that we can mobilize X number of people proactively, because being able to mobilize people proactively as opposed to reactively is 100 times better, because then you can actually start proactively doing things. But I think at the moment, like what I'm doing at the moment, all the things I'm doing at the moment, what I'm effectively trying to do is kind of get more people into the periphery, but also get more people who are within that periphery to actually start proactively doing things. And so a lot of the sort of events I'm organizing now, and the sort of things that I'm pushing for now, are sort of, I'm trying to do it less and less as reactions to things. And what I'm trying to do is take the people that I already know are sort of listening to me, and and show them the value of proactively doing things, because it's really, it's hard to kind of even explain it, but I know it sounds very sort of boring to say, well, what we're trying to do is just get numbers of people, but you've got to marshal what forces you can before you can even gauge what you can do with those forces. And there's no point making a plan that requires the use of 2, 3, 400 people, whatever it be, until you can actually mobilize that many people. I mean, practical solutions. I'm working on two things. I'm working on a more street movement based solution, which is designed to try and counter the sort of deplatforming that the left engage in. And then I'm also simultaneously working on a political solution. Now, I won't go into that too much because I'm still in the process of dealing with various entities, so I won't sort of not jeopardize, but I won't cause issues by talking about that too much. But there is another organization coming soon and another solution coming soon. But the idea is that by having those two things, there is then capacity to capture people who are wanting to engage in different types of action. There'll be the capacity to capture people who want to engage in the more sort of ideological type action, and there'll be capacity for people to engage, whether irrespective of whether they're nationalists or even hardcore nationalists, or even if they're just people who care about their nation, care about their people, and just feel like they aren't being given a voice. There will be organizations that will cater to them as well, and they won't be required to have sort of an ideological investment in anything. It will just be practical. But it's hard to sort of explain it without being really abstract. But that's what I'm working on personally.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So it sounds great. I mean, one of the things that I feel anyway is that if we can get unity, you talked about unity, and that's extremely important. If we can get unity across the board anyway, we almost creating what you've just described there anyway, because there are many different organisations that have many different skill sets and directions, and we could almost create, as it were, a patchwork quilt of organisations. They're
Yeah,
different. They're different, but they've got a similar goal or aims.
yeah, and they cater for different people. And
Yeah.
I think this is something as well that's like, when I wrote it the other day on a post, but I think it's like the key thing that has been missed for many years, which is now people are starting to realize, is whether you're an individual or an organization, if you fight for yourself, you die. If you fight for other people, you live. And there can be 100 people each fighting for themselves, and then there can be 100 people each fighting for each other. Those are the people that will actually survive. And so, with any of these organizations, I think this is the thing people are now starting to realize, where even as an organization, if you fight only for yourselves as an organization, you're doomed. Whereas if you fight for other people, even other organizations, you, without even trying to, those other people and those other organizations will then throw in their lot behind you because you fought for them instead of just fighting for yourself. And I think this is the thing that only sort of now, in the last sort of year or two, only now is that starting to happen, when maybe for the previous few decades that maybe wasn't what happened. And there's sort of there were all these organizations in the past, but a lot of them, I think, fell into the trap of priority number one was their continuation as an organization, and priority number two was the continuation of their people and their nation. And I think now people are starting to realize that actually, if you make priority number one the continuation of your people and your nation, the continuation of your organization will naturally follow from that.
I actually think as well. I mean, this is me because I do tend to try and think of things from the point of view of how we combat our enemy. And I think that as long as we can have the ability to cooperate and coordinate, I actually see no problem in it being a multitude of organisations. I actually think tactically that it's wiser to have that, because we've had big organisations like the big beast, as it were, like the BNP back in the day or whatever, and it's so much easier for the enemy to destroy that. But when you've got a myriad of organisations, all organised differently, however, all capable of coordinating, you've got something far more like the armed forces, where you've got specialist units in different areas that can be coordinated centrally. Now, if we can get to the point where people are cooperating and coordinating, we can present a lot of difficulties to our enemy, because then it's almost like we can get them playing whack-a-mole a little bit,
Well,
because
this is why I kind of, this is why I'm a very, and I don't mean this in the sense maybe a lot of people would think I mean it, but this is why I'm a militant nationalist. And by militant I don't mean violent, but I mean militant in the sense of I believe in a more militarized interpretation of nationalism, where everything is about camaraderie and the success or failure of the group, anti-individualism, all this kind of stuff. Now, that's my take on nationalism, and it's because of exactly what you said, and it's sort of that more military approach. From my own experiences and from everything I've seen, that approach presents a much bigger obstacle for any sort of enemy to get rid of. And to sort of reiterate the point I was making before, is that approach is to me the epitome of you fight for each other as opposed to fighting for yourselves, and the results of it do speak for themselves. And I think that is what needs to happen in any of these sort of entities going forward.
yeah, and it's
Certainly.
specialisation as well to a degree, because like with take the armed forces, you've got different units of special, like the paratroopers jump out of planes, people in the subs, there's people in tanks, there's people, artillery, navy. You've got different specialisations, but can all be brought together in a particular combat area, and coordinated. It's using that sort of mindset with all the groups we got, with the different skills and specializations, because we've already said about different people finding their niche group, by their means. We're a very like, take the INN, we're an extremely maverick group. When I set up the INN, I took a more Sterling approach to it. Sterling, as in the guy who set up the SAS, he went round
Yeah.
when he was setting up the SAS. He went round the jails to find the guys who'd knocked out their officers, because them are the
But
guys
the
he
thing is,
wanted.
I applaud that, because the thing is, there's like the, and this I really like that, because I think there's fundamentally two different types of leadership, really. And there's the mechanism where you kind of pick, where you kind of look and say, oh, I want that person, he's good, I want that person, he's good. Or you can take the attitude of, right, those people that sort of everyone looks down on them, what good can I get out of them? And so when you're sort of talking about how the SAS did, where it's like the people they're taking are the people that, at initial view, people might think, well, I don't want, why would anybody want them? But then actually, when you put the effort in, you realize that those people are so unbelievably good. But because nobody's ever really given them the time of day, nobody's found that out. And so I applaud that. And it's like I've even found that out with some of the people that I've been sort of working with over the last few months. And there's people like I won't sort of name names, but there's a particular man who was never really given the time of day by very many organizations or people because of his background, because he'd been homeless, etc., etc. But then when you actually start saying this guy, well, what do you want to achieve? And then it's like, well, he wants to do X, Y, Z. And you're like, right, will you help me do this? And then off his own back, the guy is doing like laps of a city centre, leafleting people. He's going and talk, and it's so good when you're able to get, when you're able to find the good in people that nobody else could see, and it, I really sort of applaud what you've done with the INN, because you've basically done that, and there's so many there's so many people who kind of get not rejected, but they're sort of looked at as, well, I can't really do anything with them. Nah, pass, 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 pass. But then all those people are then just that they still want to do something, but because no one's prepared to put the effort in and say, well, you know, what are their skills? It's never been discovered that they actually do have skills and they actually are capable of doing things. But then occasionally people like yourselves come along and you do find that, and it's a really good thing to be able to do.
Yeah,
Well, it's an absolute.
I'm not saying we're an elite unit, but we're definitely a maverick unit.
Well, I think the big thing to take from that is that the biggest tragedy in all of this is to lose a good activist to anyone. You know, anybody on this side just because of stupid things. You know, I've seen it. I've been in the Telegram world since like mid 2018, and when we first came into it, it had a real buzz about it. But you know, over the years, it really has just evolved into kind of just a ruination of everything that we're trying to do. You know, and more often than not, actually, these things that are meant to be a really positive aspect of nationalism and something that's meant to bring us all together actually ends up flipping 50-50 and actually ends up scaring people away. And thank you for your compliment, by the way, Alex. That's really kind of you to say. And it's why I like speaking to you so much, because so much of what you talk about is very INN. You know, we picked up on this quite early that, you know, this it's sort of you seem to be looking at where we look at the community aspect and the you know the micro version. It's almost like you're kind of like this macro version that's wrapping around our kind of community ideas. And I see the same thing with the BDP, and I said the same thing to Jim Lithwaite, that I feel like they're kind of like the political aspect of the INN because of where all their morals are, and they seem to be quite solid and good people behind it. You know, I see it as that. So
Yeah,
yeah, no, thank you for that, and
I'm
hopefully
a
we can
fan
make some.
of the guys at the BDP. And Jim Luthwaite and all the work they do.
Yeah, ex-colleagues of mine back in it was started obviously as ex-BNP members, and they've done a good job. Fair play to them. I mean, I personally am not for the political route anymore. That's just me. I quite like this sort of what we're doing. To be honest with you, I prefer that sort of side of it. But absolutely more power to their elbow, and everybody else who's working. The thing, Joe, I'll just pick on something Joe has said, and I'm pointing in the wrong direction because I've got me. There's something Joe said uh, about activists. You see, anybody who's been in this game a while and will tell you activists are like gold dust. They are absolutely like gold dust. Somebody who is prepared to go out, give their time, and do something are like gold dust, and you should treat them like that.
Yeah,
And the
I
thing
agree.
is, sometimes they're treated so appallingly, and you think, what? You don't realise what you're letting go there, because you are not going to replace them very easily. Because for every 100 people out there on the in Telegram on the internet, there's one activist. It really is like gems. They are like little gems in a sea of nothing. They really are. We shouldn't lose them
Agreed.
easily. We should hold on to them
Should
and
fight
do
for
what you
them.
can.
Yeah,
Fight
Yeah,
for them.
definitely.
Yeah,
I totally
absolutely.
agree.
Yeah. Create any environment that you can to allow and to
Yeah,
facilitate people to get out there and do stuff. You know, it's
yeah.
like, you know, and it's why it's such a real sort of crying shame. You know, with everything that sort of hide away from it, but you know, all the sort of the negative interaction that we had with PA. You know, over the past couple of years. You know, it's just it's a real shame because the two organizations really, I mean, could be quite complementary to each other, you know,
Mm.
whereas that it wasn't seen like that from an early standpoint. And I dread to think the amount of people that, you know, were lost from both sides throughout that entire, you know, the thing going on. You know, and
Mm.
I think everyone involved would just agree that, you know, it wasn't a good thing to happen, and it was a definite net negative, and we should never let that sort of thing happen
It's
again, you
not.
know.
It's not just the people who are lost. It's the people who never came. Because
Yeah.
if people are drawn onto Telegram, or they're starting to search to see what's going on and what they can get involved with, and all they see is this bickering backwards and forwards, They're just going to go, oh, it's not for me, and they're off. So it's like people you've never met because they just didn't get that far. They just looked and said, no, I'm not having any
Or
of that.
people that you have met. I've brought genuine, actual IRL mates into Telegram to sort of show them what we're doing and things, and they were gone within a couple of weeks. Because I'd be like, oh yeah, come into this chat and just get to know everyone. And it's like you'd say the wrong thing and
It's,
everyone would
yeah,
jump on them, and before they know it, just, no, I
yeah.
don't want anything to do with this. This is like you say with the drama and things. Nobody wants to see it. People want to see
No, no,
solutions.
no.
People want to see positivity and solutions. This is the whole idea, and which what I really respect about what you said earlier that I did want to touch on, but everyone was talking, so I didn't get a chance. But where you were saying about, thoughts just popped out of my head now. Is your laugh there, Rich? You put me off. You made me giggle there. It's completely thrown me off. What you were saying about activists and activism. Sorry, guys, carry on. It's completely popped out of my head there. You got me there, mate. You've completely brain bugged me there. What was I going to say? It's a really good point as well.
Jenny, if you can't remember it.
No, it's thrown me off. You caught
I
me.
know
It was a
you
really
feel.
good. It
I
was a
always
really
get
good
that.
point as well.
I usually go to
Um,
say something really profound, and Joe carries on talking, and I don't get the chance to say it. So.
Oh, sorry, buddy. It's the way it is, isn't it? It's like you got to jump in there when it's in your mind, otherwise it just goes, doesn't it? But yeah. I mean, everything you're doing at the minute, Alec, is really respectable, and we're all for it. I think and largely, I mean, obviously we're two different organisations and things, but we'll continue to support you in the good work that you do, and I think that should
No,
be a general
likewise.
ethos right the way across the board.
The important thing is we all keep talking. All of us keep talking,
Yeah, I
and
agree. I agree.
take every opportunity to talk to people who you haven't talked to before in the circles. We need to all start talking. People to realise that none of us are so big that they can't talk to somebody in the arena, because none of us are that big. None of us are that big. I mean, the BNP at its height had 20,000 members, had two MEPs, a guy on the GLA, 40 odd councillors, right? And that was like in the noughties. And you put all the nationalist groups together now, all of them, in terms of their numbers, and they wouldn't
Yeah, they
match that.
won't have that.
Nowhere
No,
near.
no, we know.
So we cannot afford to think we're too big or too small or whatever. We have all got to work together. A lot can be achieved with a small number of people. You don't necessarily need huge numbers, because even back in the day, 90% of the BNP members didn't do anything. They were
Hmm.
never activists. About 1 in 10 was an activist. That was pretty much it, because we did an analysis on it. And I don't think anything's changed to this day and age.
No, I don't.
You
Based on my own experiences within organisations, I don't think that's changed.
No, I think it's pretty much a 1 in 10 ratio.
It's
It's just how it is.
it's a golden ratio. I'm
Yeah,
sure of it. I'm sure it's
I've
all.
never quite understood the logic of somebody joining an organisation or a whatever to do nothing. I've never. If I join something, it's because I actually intend to do something, and I've never understood that logic. But I'm obviously in the minority, because 90% of the people do join organisations and are quite happy to do nothing in them, which is a shame. Which is again something that we've tried to cut out. What we try to do is say, tell you what, we'll just have the 1 in 10, which is what it says in our sort of inquiry pack, that we never intended to be a mass organisation, and that's why, because we add, what we try and do is filter so as we only get the 1 in 10 rather than the 9 out of 10, because we're not a membership party in the sense that we're taking a membership fee. In fact, we don't take money at all. So those 90% would be completely useless to us. They'd just sit in a chat room, and that would take up time and resources managing the chat room. So we would rather just have the 10% of activists, thanks. You know, and that's why when Joe mentioned earlier we only get so many people here, it's because we're only looking for the activists. We only want that 1 in 10.
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised how many people promise you the earth, and still when they get in, they do nothing. It's
No,
incredible.
yeah, I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
Mm.
I can see by that smile on your face that you've experienced this yourself in the relatively recent history there, Alex. Alex,
Yeah.
sorry, do apologise.
No, yeah,
It
I know
happens,
what you
mate.
mean.
You know, it is. It's just one of these things where it's, you know, as attractive as you can make an organization or what you're doing to people, and I think this is tying on to what I'd forgotten actually, it's the inspiration aspect of what you're doing. You know, just keep going out there, keep doing what you would like to see other people doing, or what you would the change that you would like to see, and then just keep doing that. You know, it's and just hope that people see it. I mean, one of our best activists came off me cleaning up a gravestone. You know, and he's been one of the most committed guys that we've had come over, just because that caught on to him, because he's a I don't want to say too much about him, really, to be fair, but you know, it's close to his heart what I was doing. You know, so he saw that and he was like, "Look, you're different because of this, and I understand why you're doing this." You know, sort of the idea of the reverse broken window theory. You know, it's about just changing things in little positive steps, and then trying to encourage other people to do those steps as well, and then hopefully leading on to sort of, you know, getting on the streets and getting to protests and making some noise. You know, that's how I see it anyway. You know,
Yeah.
you got to
But do you
fight
know
for
what?
those.
I honestly think the best for organisations like yours, Alex, like ours, and all of them really, the best place for us to actually recruit is at these protests, amongst the general
Yeah,
public,
I think
amongst the
that's, to be
community.
honest, I think that's a almost like, so when you sort of say, right, we're doing a demonstration process, whatever. What is the point? Because this is a question I think a lot of people don't ask us. Like, what is the point of this protest? Because the one thing that we can't be doing is doing a protest for the sake of doing a protest. That's pointless. But if you sort of go into it with the attitude of, right, what is the objective of this protest? Now, for me, for instance, like Lincoln this weekend. Now, the objective of that protest is not to do a protest for the sake of doing a protest. The objective for me is, I want to gauge how many people in Lincolnshire can be proactively mobilized to actually do something about the problem. And then, based on the numbers I get from that, I can then think, right, what is the best way to take the numbers we've got and bring that, and you sort of weaponize it and bring it to bear, whether it's on the council, whether it's on the MP, etc., etc. Now, if one of the objectives of your protest is, networking, that's absolutely a good thing. But you have to go into it like cognizant that that's an objective, and then sort of think, right, if one of the objectives of this protest is to network with other nationalists, you've then got to sort of think, right, when I'm there, what do I need to do in order to ensure that I can get the best networking value out of that protest? Well, maybe it will involve inviting prominent people from other groups to give speeches. Maybe it would involve following up the protest with a meeting, since people are already there anyway. And I think, yeah, you're right. Like, there's, if you sort of have like an objectives based view of everything, you can accomplish a lot from that. Sort of, for every action you take, it's like, right, what's the point of this? What am I
Mm.
trying to accomplish? So it's almost like you come up with your objective and then you work out the actions you want to take afterwards.
Yeah,
You go
I
that way.
mean, yeah, absolutely. You're 100% right. It's like this stream. When we decided to do this stream, it was as a networking tool, because basically every guest we have on, we're networking with them, and we're going to have guests in a sense because we're building a rapport. And every guest we have on, even from all the outside the nationalist spectrum, it's about networking with those people and building those bridges, as I said earlier. And it's the same when you go out to a protest and you go to, like, to somebody else's protest. You go in there to network, not necessarily to convert if they're of a slightly different mindset, but you go in there to network, to start to showing them, to get talking to people. it's a great way of getting people on board. I mean, um, we've had some, not huge numbers, but we've had people come through from protests or things that we've attended. They've come now, they're full members, or they're coming through the ranks, because we have a prospective member area, and but they're coming through that now, and these are people who we've, in a sense, recruited on the road, and and I think that's a great way forward, because one, you've met them face to face in the first instance, so you're taking away that anonymity thing that you get on Telegram. You're also, that because they're at a protest, there's half a chance they're actually going to be an activist, because they're
Yeah,
already there. They're already actually out there doing something.
yeah,
So,
I
and they,
agree.
so straight away, these are guys I want. The guys who are actually prepared to get out in the streets and mobilise. That's the guy we want. All you got to do then is convince them that your organisation is perhaps one that they might feel at home in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sort of brings a little bit full circle. Don't you laugh now, Rich, because you take this thought out of my head, I'm going to go mad. But it brings you sort of full circle where if you run sort of a clandestine organization that's very closed off, very hidden, oh, we don't want anyone to know what we're doing in here, because of whatever. When you do finally get attacked by the press or you get attacked by these people, well, no one knows you.
Yeah,
So
so
they're
there's no
they're
defense.
inclined to listen to what they're saying. Like, well, I don't know who those crazy guys are in the
Well,
woods. Like, yeah, they could be in there with loads of guns and they could be doing this and they could be doing that. You know, but whereas, the way that we operate, we turn up at these protests and we're happy, we're bouncing around, we're happy, we're smiling, we're having a good time whenever we go to anything. And, if you ask any of one of these little old ladies that stop and talk to me, and try and tell her that I'm a bad guy, well, you're probably going to get a handbag around your head, like, because we get on with these people and we've built a personal
yeah,
friendship now with a lot of these people, so they don't stand for it. When these news articles come out, their attitude towards us doesn't change at the next protest because they saw us at the previous protest and they know what we're about and they know that we're good people. They've spent days with us now, and on a personal level, which is really good. And it's why I like what you're doing as well, Alex, because it's very upfront. It's very transparent. You're not hiding anything away. You're saying this is what we're
oh
doing.
no,
This
in,
is,
in
this
fact,
is what we're,
in fact,
how we aim to get there.
in fact, whenever Hope Not Hate write articles about me, I actually publicise them myself.
So do we. Yeah, yeah. We post our Hope Not Hate report every year, don't we, mate?
I think
We,
they,
we,
I
So if
think they,
anyone
I
out
think they
there,
were, they were
don't really,
writing one about
it's
me.
good.
They wrote that one about me recently, and the sort of the leftists that were running that Scampton campaign, the subverted one, were sort of bringing it up and whatever. So I just publicised it myself on the page that we created. It was like, oh, by the way, this article fully explains the level of contempt I have for the politicians of today. This article fully explains my opposition to the problem with immigration, because it's like by doing that you've taken away the weapon basically, because it's like, oh well, we were gonna expose him by writing that, but he's just told everyone, so that people can't dox you if you've doxed yourself.
no, that's right. I've always
That's
said
that's
that.
that's
Always
why I
said
did
that.
it.
If you
Take the
if
power
you
away.
if you're worried about being doxed, what are they going to try and do? They're going to try and dox you. If
Yeah,
you
whereas
dox
if you do it,
yourself,
if
it's
if you
like,
make it
yeah,
look like you don't care, then
yeah.
people won't want to do it.
I've actually put on our channel on a number of occasions. I've put my address. I don't care, so I'll stick my address. Do you know what? The reason I don't care is because I was on the BNP League members list and I haven't moved. So
Yeah,
anybody with half a brain can find my address anyway. Or they could look up Richard Lumbier when I've stood in an election, because my address gets published then. So it's like, I don't care.
Yeah,
If they're
and
really
we're
that
still
clever,
here.
they'd find it anyway. Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah, yeah.
This is what really annoys me. This this mentality of, oh, I can't be involved in anything like that because I'll be arrested and I'll be,
I'll
I'll have my
lose my
kids
job.
taken, or I'll
I'll do
lose my
this. Yeah.
job and all this kind of stuff. Well, it's funny because we've been in this, like, pretty open for God knows how long. I haven't had any issues, but then again, also I haven't been making any threats to violence or anything like that. I've been pretty sensible with my I've tried not to say anything over the years, not to sort of get myself into trouble, which was wise, really, wasn't it? Looking at it now,
Like we were
but
saying in an earlier conversation, I don't think we're on air though when I said it. If you show them your Achilles heel, where are they going to go for? Every time.
yeah,
If you show them what you're afraid of, that's the bit they're going to go for. They're going to go for
yeah.
that
Yeah, no,
every single time.
you're absolutely right.
Well, I'm not sure if we got any further towards a solution towards our segregation
We
or thing,
started
but
the conversation.
I think, yeah, well, we've definitely dug into a lot of very relevant aspects of it, I think. But we're getting on for an hour and a half now, so I'm going to be that guy that says, maybe we should sort of start thinking about winding it down. But as we said, Alex, we're all becoming friends here anyway. So I mean, there's absolutely no reason why we couldn't do a part three, in a few
Yeah,
weeks or
I'm
whatever. And
happy to. I'm happy to come back. Especially in
brilliant,
sort of in because there's a lot of things going on over the next few weeks. Anyway, I mean, I'm
Mm.
quite busy for the next few weekends. I got
brilliant.
Lincoln this weekend, and then Skegness again the weekend after that. And with Scott, he's the guy that's sort of been doing a lot of the organisation behind them both. And then Walsall on the 8th of May.
Yeah,
So
we got
there's,
a couple. We got a couple of activists coming up to Lincoln. About three of them are coming up.
oh, that would be
Unfortunately,
good.
unfortunately, I can't. But yeah, three of our activists, I believe, are going up on to Lincoln. So
That would be good. Well,
I'll
it's
get them to
not.
say hi.
Well, where we've advertised it for is it's not far from the station actually. If they're getting the train up,
I think no,
it's like
I think they're driving up. But I'll get them to say hi, Alec. I'll get them to say hi while they're up there if they get a chance.
yeah. No, that'd be good. It'd be great to speak to them.
Brilliant. And get yourself some of these, Alec. Get some business cards done. One of the best things we ever did, wasn't it, Rich, for
Yeah, man.
networking? Just simple, just with an email on there or whatever. It's very
Yeah.
difficult to exchange numbers in these kind of scenarios and whatever. I just say that's a really good bit of advice, really. Even if it's just your name on a number on the back, I'd say get some of those for sure. Because
Well,
again, you don't want to miss one of these activists.
by the way, we've got a burner phone. Did I tell you this? This is probably not what we should be talking about on air, but I don't care. We've got a
Oh,
burner phone, so when we do the next lot, we'll stick the phone number on there,
we'll have an
and
inquiry line now.
we've got somebody who will man it.
Fantastic. I like it. I like it.
That's good.
Brilliant. So, so could you just run through us? Do you want to sort of have a bit of a plug of your next few protests and stuff, Alec, or any streams
Yeah,
that you're
of
coming on
course.
and things like that? Go
So
for it, mate.
so
Plug away.
the schedule as I've got it at the moment. So this weekend is Lincoln. It's to do with the RAF Scampton saga, and then the weekend after that, on the 29th, is Skegness round two. The 8th of May, which is the bank holiday Monday, is Walsall. And then these are the ones I'll be at. I'm not necessarily the organizer of them. And then the 20th of May, there's one been advertised in Newcastle, and I'm just trying to find out the details about that because it's been advertised for quite a while, but the details may have changed. So I'll have to get back to everyone on that. When I find out, I'll put it on my Telegram channel anyway, which is the channel is my name. So if you want to look for it that way. And then on the 3rd of June, there's a big one in Leeds, which has been organised by the chap who runs a group called Yorkshire Patriots. You can find it on Facebook. That one we're hoping is going to be the biggest one of the year so far. It should be very easy for people to get to, and there's a lot of people in Leeds. They're not necessarily politically motivated people, but there's a lot of people who are going to go to that, and there's quite a good list of speakers. I won't divulge who, but there's quite a sort of heavy hitting list. And then after the 3rd of June, I won't divulge information, but there's more being planned to continue on from that. So that's what I've got so far. Lincoln 22nd of April,
Brilliant.
Skegness 29th of April, Walsall 8th of May, Newcastle 20th of May, Leeds 3rd of June.
Well, can I add one to that for you?
Yes.
If you want to, if you fancy coming and meeting us in Yorkshire on the Saturday the 13th of May, We are our roadshow. This ends now roadshow goes to that area. I'll give you the exact details because we tend to not announce the place. We prefer to turn up on the day and do what we're doing rather
Okay.
than
Yeah.
announcing
Yeah. Yeah.
beforehand.
Do
It's in the
keep.
Yorkshire area, but I'll let you know obviously off air. And I'll see you in Walsall definitely on the
Yes.
8th. I'll definitely see you
Yes.
there.
It'd be great to see you.
Yeah, that's pre-announcing where I'm going to be, but yeah, we will be. We do intend being at Walsall, so.
No, thank you very much for having me on the show, guys.
That's no problem.
Absolute pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure, mate. It's been nice to speak to you at last, and yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. I like a lot of what you say. I really do. And you obviously, I'm talking to you now as if you're some young whippersnapper, but you're a lad with his head on his shoulders, and you know, and don't let them get you down because they'll drive you mad. Some of these people, but you'll get through it, mate. You'll get through it, and just it is a sifting and sorting exercises to get the right people, Alek. It really is, mate. And
Yeah,
just
I know what you
persevere with it.
mean.
Just
Yeah, don't get
persevere with it.
downhearted, man. It has its ups and downs, definitely for sure.
Yeah,
But yeah, the wins are worth the losses.
yeah, yeah. And it's been a pleasure tonight. I've enjoyed myself tonight. I
It's
can't
been
believe
really
an hour
good.
and a half has gone. I believe it.
I
I really
know.
can't believe it.
I'm really enjoying these streams now. It's becoming sort of something I actually look forward to in the week rather than being something to be nervous about. It's
And I
just
can't
great to
believe
talk to
Joe's let me
friends.
get a word in edgeways. It's incredible.
Yeah, but you got your mic working now,
I
haven't you?
know.
I always worry you're going to pull the thing off.
I
Oh,
ain't like
good as gold. Well,
scratching his ear every 5 minutes.
that's it. That's it. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. This was a pre-recorded episode, so no, we hope you enjoyed it, and yeah, we look forward to seeing you again next time, Alec, as always. And yeah, to everyone, just keep on fighting, keep that chin up, and let's keep moving forward. But as always, thank you guys, and it's been really enjoyable.
No, thanks, guys,
Yeah,
and see you
yeah, no
later.
problem. See you later.
Fantastic. Have a great one, guys. See you later. Bye bye.